What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at what's going wrong for England in the UEFA Euros and why they're playing so boring and they're just lacking offensive threat in their performances, and their tempo has just slowed down massively with the players they have. You wouldn't expect it. So before we start, check out my book. There's a link in the description below. I think if you're interested in tactics, you'll really enjoy it. So be sure to check that out, and a link to Keyframe is how I made this video. Check that out as well if you want to produce content like this. Super easy to use and very affordable. But let's get right into it. So the first problem we can look at for England is their structure. They use a 4-3-3 with an asymmetric midfield 3, and they stagger them with a 6, 8, and a 10. Mason Mount playing the 10, then Phillips is the 8 with Declan Rice as the 6. Their front 3 with Harry Kane in the middle with Foden and Sterling on the wings. So their base structure isn't the problem, as we see a few concepts just come to the eye early. We have our rondo situation through the half space with the central defenders connecting the first and second line, so no problems there. But it does become an issue when we look at how Scotland played against them and how teams will probably look to play, especially higher up the field and in the midfield third. So Scotland pressing with numerical equality here, and their midfield matching up with 4 players then going to arrive and pressing the England players. So here there's no numerical superiority. So in a case like this, either if they look to find the free man, they need to be able to circulate or switch the ball and skip players in their circulation phase, or they can disrupt the press by looking to break it and using movement to then access the weak side. Or if they are going to play through the pressure and break down teams' pressure directly through creating superiority, they would require positional or dynamic superiority in these situations. So some sort of movement, rotation, or interchange to then elicit this. So we look at the two of the big managers in the Premier League. Pep Guardiola is more about positional and numerical superiority, establishing lose-lose situations for the defense and finding the free man, creating this opportunity behind the opponent's pressure and in between the lines and further up the field. Now the next example I'm going to use is Bielsa and using his rotation and creating dynamic superiority against opposing teams. So this would allow for a team pressing in numerical equality to get unbalanced because of the movement they would use to then vacate dangerous spaces and then potentially have a higher player move into, but then have a higher player move into the dangerous space that's been vacated, and then having the support structures around the ball to continue the attack going forward. And this is something that England just didn't lack. They had their structure. They were pretty much stick to their positions with minimal rotations or use rotations and interchanges out of context. Then the other thing was slight inefficiency within their own structure, and the first of which we see here is just the vertical alignment of the winger and fullback. Now, not a problem for starting positions using dual width, but this became the case and a huge problem when circulation would occur and then the ball would be played into the winger with a negative field of view with pressure mounting. And the same on the ball side here. We can look, so 2 players on the same vertical line, and again, not a problem initially, but huge problem when this player receives the ball under pressure with negative field of view, limited options, and a high pressure area. So as we talked about just a second ago, was the lack of intentional actions when using the wide area, as we see vertical alignment, and then their wide structure consists of 2 players in the same vertical line, and then the more advanced player between defenders. But then we see they're even playing now, just as we saw a second ago. Scotland is pressing with numerical equality, and when they do this and you don't have numerical superiority, you have to be even better in using your connections and your positioning efficiency. So the ball was played just vertically up the field in a pressure, and the biggest thing about this was there is no context to why they did this. I felt England, they just moved from one offensive action to the next without any clear goal when in possession. They would often just circulate the ball. It seemed like for the sake of circulation rather rather than for the sake of changing the angle of the ball to then progress through a better, more beneficial area. And then we see when Scotland did go and press, they had 5 defenders, so central defender jumping, wing back jumping. The space is then in behind. There's more than enough of it to access, but this then comes from players having the ability and the intent behind their actions to access this space. So as we see, Harry Kane, not the best at running in behind and having a threat going forward in behind using his pace, not his strong suit, but he is extremely strong at dropping back towards the ball in these areas in the half space between the lines. And then we have a player like Mason Mount who can then take advantage of this space through a rotation and or a staggered run. So just a few ways. One, it would clear out the half space and the space between the lines with a vacating movement, allow Harry Kane to drop in to use his strength and supply with runners going beyond the last line of defense and in behind. So now again, in the second half, England circulate possession, but then they run into the problem of circulating possession just for the sake of circulating possession. So from here, England have the ball in possession, but there's no need for them to force the ball into such a close proximity. 2 players playing the same role, as we see here. Virtually no difference from the first player to the second player who receives the ball. Phil Foden, or Raheem Sterling, on the wing here, receiving from Luke Shaw. No real difference between the 2 players' positioning, other than Raheem Sterling has a worse field of view and he can only really see the back corner of the field where there's virtually no dangerous space and no practical use when you're going up the field in the midfield third to then be looking at your own corner flag. But with Scotland's 5-3-2, again, there's a little bit of opportunity to play in behind, but for the most part, there's a high level of spatial control. And then the weak side players are the players who are free for England, so the fullback and the winger. But the key thing when playing against a 5-3-2 or any team that presses with numerical equality and get a high level of players around the ball is having the ability of your central defenders, like John Stones does for City, to then be able to circulate possession fast, progress through the half space, and the positioning here is just a matter of a few yards. So John Stones is playing just on the inside of the half space we see here, but a change in positioning we can see just a few yards, and then now when he receives circulation, he can progress around the team's midfield and forward line. And not only this, but when he does attempt progression, midfielders will step out because the forward line will be beaten. So when midfielders step out, there'll be more space created between the lines and then more opportunity for creative players to use their attributes. So now the last picture here, we look at their front 5, their starting structure between the lines, and it's very flat, but again, not an issue if it's a starting position. We have our back 4 in possession of the ball, and then now our holding midfielder. So the problem becomes with a team like Scotland playing in high vertical and horizontal compactness, there needs to be movement to then test their structure and put stress upon their defensive mechanisms. And what England didn't do was exactly this. They didn't have players or use on-ball or off-ball movements to elicit a jump of the England team or test their structure with rotations or first-line passes to draw the Scotland structure out to then create space in more advanced area. And the biggest thing in this match was the space in behind and how they were going to access this. So with a back 5, your central defenders will be more keen to jump because they have a little bit extra cover, but this does create opportunity to run in behind, especially when the wingback and wide central defender both jump. But the first problem wasn't attracting enough of the situation, and then the second problem was utilizing the space when it was created, which was very rare. And we can then talk about little things, just conceptual things of building with a back 4, single pivot, two forwards. It just didn't create a lot of beneficial passing options into the single pivot, and with Sean McGinn jumping, created a slight opportunity to play into the 10 space if they had emphasized this action a little bit more. But again, no occupation, no clear passing options into the pivot or into the 10 space for that matter, and just very isolated play, especially when they're going into their fullbacks. So that's the analysis, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.